Hello and welcome to Pro-Life Primetime News. Today is Friday, May 24th. I'm Leslie Palma. Memorial Day weekend this year marks the 40th anniversary of a gruesome discovery in Milwaukee. Police received reports of children throwing rocks, but when they arrived at the scene, the children told the officers they were throwing little people. I'll cover this in my top story. Continuing its blatant persecution of pro-lifers, the Biden Justice Department this week filed civil suits against two pro-life groups and several individuals, claiming their protests at abortion businesses in Northeast Ohio violated federal law. I'll have this and all the news you need to know in Abortion in the News. Former South Carolina Governor and UN Ambassador Nikki Haley has finally said she will cast her vote for former President Donald Trump in November. And voters in Maryland are wondering if former Governor Larry Hogan is pro-abortion enough to represent the late-term abortion state in the U.S. Senate. I'll cover these stories in political news in a nutshell. We all know that Memorial Day is much more than the official start to summer. Stay tuned to the end for a short video from the History Channel about America's most solemn holiday. Memorial Day weekend this year marks the 40th anniversary of a tragic yet eye-opening episode that unfolded in Milwaukee in 1984. Police received reports of children throwing rocks, but when they arrived at the scene, officers discovered something much worse. The children had come across the bodies of aborted babies that had been thrown in a dumpster. They told police they were throwing little people.
A group of small children discovered the containers last night.
We found some legs and the arms and the hands.
I'd like to give a shout out now to Carol Novelli of Live Action for reconstructing this story, and I'll post a link to her story on X at Pro-Life News Show. Please take a look. The story of the little people received massive media coverage in Milwaukee, forcing city residents to confront the reality of abortion 9 years after it was legalized throughout the nation. The bodies of these tiny abortion victims were picked up at a now-closed abortion business, oddly named Bread and Roses. The driver for Bayshore Clinical Labs picked up the babies, but on the way back to her headquarters, she was overwhelmed by the smell of formaldehyde. She stopped at the nearest trash bin and left the babies there. Once the story became public, the driver was promptly fired. This is how one Milwaukee station covered the macabre story.
Discovery of 11 fetuses in a garbage dumpster on Milwaukee's north side. Alan May has the story.
Authorities found 11 actual fetuses, as well as that many more empty specimen containers labeled with the names of women who had had abortions. The fetuses were found last night in this dumpster behind the Mill Medical Center at 76th and Florist on Milwaukee's northwest side. Police say they were sent to the scene to investigate a report of children throwing rocks. When questioned, the children said they didn't have any rocks. They were throwing little people. Under Wisconsin law, however, the fetuses were too young to be considered people.
A clinic or a hospital can treat a fetus under 20 weeks of age like any specimen. Certificate is not required, so there's no violation of the law.
Authorities confirm that Mill Medical Center had no involvement in the fetus disposal. In its own statement, it says, "We do not do abortions in this clinic and are appalled by these events." Well, late this afternoon, an official of Bayshore Clinical Labs, a company in the business of receiving and delivering specimens for medical clinics, said one of its own employees, a driver, has been fired for, quote, regrettably and improperly, unquote, dropping the fetuses into the dumpster after receiving them from another clinic in downtown Milwaukee. District Attorney Michael McCann questions the lack of control in cases such as this.
It certainly is an inappropriate place to dispose of them, just to throw them in a dumpster. Now, how it should be done, I think that's something that should be addressed by the Common Council with an ordinance or the state by a statute.
Alan May, Channel 12 Action News, Milwaukee.
Longtime pro-life activist Dan Zeidler at that time was the executive director of Wisconsin Citizens for Concerned Life, now Wisconsin Right to Life, and he requested permission from the Milwaukee County Medical Examiner to bury the bodies. Over the objections of Planned Parenthood and the ACLU, the request was granted. Zeidler told me last week that it was thanks to the courage of Milwaukee County Executive Bill O'Donnell that they were able to bury the bodies in the children's section of the Milwaukee Archdiocesan Cemetery, which Zeidler described as the most sacred, important, peaceful resting place for aborted babies anywhere in the world. The cemetery, called Holy Cross Cemetery, is the site of a service every September as part of the National Day of Remembrance for Aborted Children, an annual memorial initiated in 2013 by Priests for Life, Citizens for a Pro-Life Society, and the Pro-Life Action League. But at the funeral for the little people in 1984, a young man named Jerry Horn, then with Project Save Our Babies, talked about something rarely voiced in that era, the way abortion impacts fathers.
For the fathers of these unborn babies, and for all the fathers of whose children have died in abortion, that they will receive strength, that they need to cope with the tragedy of never knowing their children.
Jerry Horn has been with Priests for Life since 1997. We call him a senior advisor, but he has worn many, many hats over the years. He's the person we have often turned to when we need a miracle. In 1984, Jerry lived in Appleton, Wisconsin with his wife Bonnie and their children. They deliberately moved into a house next door to an abortion mill, so their protests were personal. I asked Jerry what he remembers of the discovery of the little people. The air was electrically charged about pro-life then, he told me. This is when the pro-aborts had the world hoodwinked, that a baby was just a thimble full of blood or a clump of cells. They had the upper hand then, but the discovery of the babies helped to convince people of what we had always known, that these were babies. These little people ended up speaking loud and clear. The 1984 incident was not the first time the bodies of abortion victims would be discovered. In 1982, the bodies of more than 16,000 abortion victims were found in a locked storage container in California and were the subject of a 3-year court battle between pro-lifers who wanted to honor them with a burial and abortion advocates who wanted them disposed as medical waste, thus stripping them of their humanity. The babies finally were buried in 1985. Michigan pro-life activist Monica Miller later found the bodies of more than 1,200 abortion victims by searching in dumpsters behind abortion mills. Many of these babies also are buried at Holy Cross Cemetery with the little people. The Milwaukee story also brings to mind what happened to the babies discovered in the Philadelphia House of Horrors run by abortionist Kermit Gosnell. The bodies of 47 aborted babies were found there, and Priests for Life led the charge to have the Philadelphia medical examiner release the babies for a dignified burial, like that given to the Milwaukee little people. We had a service in our chapel in New York to name the Gosnell victims, but their bodies were cremated in Philadelphia with no one present to honor them. Their cremated remains were buried at Laurel Hill Cemetery in Philadelphia. More recently, the little people call to mind the 5 late-term abortion victims whose bodies were given to pro-life activist Lauren Handy, the same woman who last week was sentenced to nearly 5 years in prison for a peaceful protest inside the Washington, D.C. abortion mill where the babies were killed, and this week was named in a civil suit in Ohio. Since the bodies of the 5 babies were given to her in March 2022, members of Congress and pro-life leaders have called for autopsies to see if they were killed by the illegal partial birth abortion method or were born alive and allowed to die. No action has been taken to provide justice for the 5. Back in 1984, when the little people were found, Dan Zeidler asked a question that pro-lifers still ask to this day.
And a lot of people are upset with finding dead babies in garbage dumpsters, but is that any worse than what actually caused them to be put into the garbage dumpster? In other words, the whole abortion ethic that we have. And I think many, many people are upset with this, and they'd be even more upset if they knew the true reality of abortion.
As another pro-life activist was sentenced to prison for her role in a protest inside a Washington, D.C. killing center, the Biden Justice Department on Monday filed civil suits against 2 pro-life groups and several individuals, claiming their protests at abortion businesses in Northeast Ohio violated federal law. Prosecutors accused Citizens for a Pro-Life Society, Red Rose Rescue, and 7 people of violating the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act. The Justice Department is seeking financial damages, including more than $20,000 for first violations and nearly $31,000 for subsequent offenses. It is also seeking damages for those affected by the incidents, according to Cleveland.com. Among the pro-lifers cited were Monica Miller, head of Citizens for a Pro-Life Society, and a Catholic priest, Father Fidelis Moshinsky, who is also facing a prison term for a protest outside a Long Island Planned Parenthood. Another person charged in the Ohio civil suit was Lauren Handy, a D.C. activist sentenced last week to 57 months in federal prison for her role in a 2020 protest in D.C. Also this week, an 8th pro-lifer convicted along with Handy in the D.C. case was sentenced to 24 months. Heather Idoni, who suffered a stroke while in jail, also has been convicted in a Tennessee case and will receive that sentence in July. Abortion fans in Minnesota this week failed in their efforts to place an equal rights amendment in the state constitution that would have guaranteed a right to abortion in the state, already one of the most abortion-friendly states in the nation. The amendment's deceptive language helped kill it in the end. In an effort to avoid using the word abortion, Democrat authors wrote that the amendment would protect the right to be, quote, making and effectuating decisions about all matters relating to one's own pregnancy or decision whether to become or remain pregnant. The language only was revealed 3 weeks ago, which turned out to be just long enough to mobilize pro-life groups to fight against it. The measure passed the House after 15 hours of debate, but never made it to the Senate floor for a vote. In Colorado, a proposed amendment that would invent a right to abortion in that state's constitution will be placed before voters in November, after elections officials last Friday verified signatures collected by abortion advocates. The amendment also would repeal a nearly 40-year-old constitutional ban on state money being used to pay for abortions. The chemical abortion drugs mifepristone and misoprostol could soon be reclassified as controlled and dangerous substances in Louisiana. A bill passed by the legislature yesterday would make it harder to obtain the pills. According to the Associated Press, doctors would be required to have a specific license to prescribe the drugs. Knowingly possessing the drugs without a valid prescription would carry a punishment, including hefty fines and jail time. Pro-life lawmakers in the state say the reclassification is necessary to protect mothers from being given the drugs without their knowledge or consent. And as the nation awaits a ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court that could impact how mifepristone is prescribed, a new poll shows that a majority of Americans believe women should have to see a doctor before taking the deadly drug. The Reuters poll found that 50% of Americans believe an examination by a doctor should be required, while 30% said no exam should be necessary. 17% were unsure. South Carolina can continue to enforce its heartbeat law, a state judge ruled last Friday. Planned Parenthood was seeking to block the law while its challenge against it continues. In this second attempt to scuttle a law that protects babies once a heartbeat can be detected, usually around 6 weeks, the nation's #1 abortion seller is hoping to prove the wording of the law can be interpreted to mean that abortion could remain legal until the 9th week of a mother's pregnancy. Pro-abortion California Governor Gavin Newsom quietly signed a law yesterday that allows some Arizona abortionists to become temporarily licensed to kill babies in California. The law, which will go into effect immediately, is mostly symbolic. Newsom was attempting a workaround of a pre-Roe Arizona law that protects most babies from abortion. That law has been repealed. And finally, the abortion-loving media lost its collective mind this week when a pro-life OBGYN was appointed to a committee in Texas that evaluates pregnancy-related deaths. Dr. Ingrid Skopp was among the new appointees who will serve on the Texas Maternal Mortality and Morbidity Review Committee, which tracks pregnancy-related deaths, makes recommendations to the legislature on best practices and policy changes, and assesses the impact of abortion laws on maternal mortality. The pro-abortion American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists said in a statement that members of the committee should be, quote, unbiased, free of conflicts of interest, and focused on the appropriate standards of care. What the statement didn't mention is that physicians who are not pro-life are typically pro-abortion and thus not free of bias. Pro-aborts across the nation have been insisting for nearly 2 years that women will die if they can't have abortions. Happily, no women have died since Roe v. Wade was overturned in June 2022. And that's Abortion in the News. Former South Carolina Governor and UN Ambassador Nikki Haley has finally said she will cast her vote for former President Donald Trump in November. During an event Wednesday in Washington, D.C., the one-time presidential contender said Trump still has work to do to win over her supporters, many of whom still vote for her in primary elections despite her withdrawal from the race. Trump would be smart to reach out to the millions of people who voted for me and continue to support me and not assume that they're just going to be with him, Haley said, and I genuinely hope he does that. Former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan is trying to convince voters he is pro-abortion enough to represent the state in the U.S. Senate. Known for being personally opposed to abortion, the Republican now describes himself as pro-choice and supports restoring Roe as the law of the land. Hogan said his stance is not new, but that he wanted to clarify where he stands. The mainstream media is not buying that, painting his clarification as an ideological about-face. Hogan will face Democrat Angela Alsobrooks in the race to replace retiring Democrat Ben Cardin. And if elected, Alsobrooks has pledged to sign on as co-sponsor of the Radical Women's Health Protection Act on her first day in office. Democratic incumbents and challengers chasing seats in the U.S. Senate in November are so gung-ho for abortion that many of them are campaigning on a pledge to get rid of the filibuster, a rule that ensures legislation has at least the tacit support of 60 senators. Pro-abortion Democrats who have expressed their willingness to change the rules include Arizona's Mark Kelly, Pennsylvania's Bob Casey, Minnesota's Amy Klobuchar, and Wisconsin's Tammy Baldwin. Republicans have shown time and again that they will stop at nothing in their pursuit of controlling women's bodies, and I believe them, Baldwin said. She did not mention that Democrats seemingly will stop at nothing to ensure the unborn don't get out of the womb alive. Primary elections in Oregon, Kentucky, Georgia, and Idaho on Tuesday didn't have much good news for the left. In Kentucky, 18% of those choosing a presidential candidate voted uncommitted instead of casting a ballot for Biden. Another 11% of the votes went to long-shot candidate Marianne Williamson and Representative Dean Phillips, who has dropped out of the race. According to the Washington Post, never Biden voters outnumber never Trump Americans. In a poll of voters in 6 key swing states, 46% said they would never vote for Trump, while 52% said the same about incumbent Biden. Meanwhile, in Georgia, Supreme Court Justice Andrew Pinson, a Republican, won re-election, defeating Democrat John Barrow, who complained that he was not able to tout his support for abortion while campaigning because of a state law prohibiting judicial candidates from talking about issues that could come before them in court. In Oregon, the sister of Washington Representative Pramila Jayapal, a member of the pro-abortion anti-Israel squad in the U.S. House, lost her bid for a House seat. Shushila Jayapal lost to State Representative Maxine Dexter, who is favored to win the House seat being vacated by Democrat Earl Blumenauer. And that's political news in a nutshell. Americans tend to celebrate Memorial Day as the official start to summer. Family barbecues, beach vacations, and binge drinking have come to be associated with the 3-day weekend. But Memorial Day is a solemn holiday set aside to honor the men and women who have given their lives in service to the United States of America and every one of us privileged to live here. Please enjoy this short video from the History Channel that tells the story of the holiday.
Memorial Day is also the most solemn American holiday, a day to remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice while defending their nation. The Civil War, America's bloodiest chapter. Over 600,000 soldiers killed in action. Almost every community in every state suffered the loss of young men. As the war came to an end, mourners in both northern and southern states began placing flags and flowers on the graves of fallen soldiers. The town of Waterloo, New York is officially credited with starting the holiday. On May 5, 1866, its citizens closed their shops and businesses so that everyone could decorate the graves of the men killed during the war. Then an old war general had an idea. John A. Logan was the leader of a Union Veteran Association. He spearheaded an effort to unite all the decoration services into one national holiday, designating May 30th as Decoration Day. On the first National Decoration Day, 1868, 5,000 war widows, orphans, and other mourners gathered at Arlington National Cemetery. They placed flowers and ribbons on the 20,000 graves of both Union and Confederate soldiers. 2 future presidents and fellow Union veterans, Ulysses Grant and James A. Garfield, attended the ceremony. Throughout the 19th century, Decoration Day grew. Ceremonies were held in major Civil War battlefields like Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and Antietam Field in Maryland. By the end of the century, the holiday was renamed Memorial Day. But war wounds ran deep. Most southern states refused to commemorate a holiday they regarded as honoring Union soldiers. So each state commemorated their war dead with different Confederate decoration days. Several southern states continue the tradition to this day. World War I ushered in the age of modern warfare. America lost over 130,000 soldiers in the global conflict. This shared experience finally bonded America's North and South. When the war ended, May 30th became a day to honor all American soldiers who died in battle as far back as the Revolutionary War. America interred its first unknown soldier in Arlington National Cemetery on Armistice Day, 1921. Every Memorial Day, this soldier and other unknown soldiers are honored with a wreath-laying ceremony conducted by the President or Vice President. They are reminders of all those who never made it home. Memorial Day became a federal holiday in 1971, and Congress shifted it from May 30th to the 4th Monday in May, giving federal workers a 3-day weekend. All across America, veterans and civilians still gather in parades and vigils to remember the generations who gave their lives for their nation's freedom.
Thank you so much for joining me on Pro-Life Primetime News, produced at Priests for Life headquarters in Titusville, Florida. If you like this show, please consider making a donation to prolifegift.org. These donations help fund all of our work here at Priests for Life, which enables us to continue educating, equipping, and activating God's people to end abortion. For all your pro-life news updates during the week, please follow us on X at Pro-Life News Show, and please make sure to tune into our other shows like Just Ask Janet and Praying for America. Go to endabortion.tv for the schedule. Have a safe and blessed Memorial Day as we honor those who sacrificed their lives for our freedom. I'm Leslie Palma. Remember, life is the only choice.